Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're breaking down a massive catalyst event around Vanda Pharmaceuticals. That's ticker VNDA. We're going to unpack the story behind their newly approved drug, Nurioss, and what it really means for investors.
And this is such an interesting one because this isn't just about a single drug approval. It's a deep dive into regulatory persistence, a major commercial pivot, and what could be a solution for one of the biggest problems in the entire drug industry right now.
Okay, let's start at the top. The core event happened right at the tail end of 2025. Give us that results snapshot.
Right. So on December 30, 2025, the U.S. FDA approved Nurioss. That's the brand name for a compound called Tradipitant. And the specific indication is for preventing motion-induced vomiting in adults.
And when you say this is historic, you're not kidding. This isn't just another option on the shelf.
Not even close. This is the first new pharmacological treatment for motion sickness to get FDA approval in over 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah. I mean, for generations, we've just been using the same old stuff, antihistamine, scopolamine, things with well-known side effects. Nurioss is a totally different mechanism.
And you could see investors understood that significance. The market reaction was pretty immediate.
Oh, it was explosive. VNDA shares were already up about 62% in the month before the decision, so there was a lot of anticipation. But on the day the news actually dropped, the stock jumped another 30.58%.
A jump like that tells you the market isn't just looking at motion sickness. They see a much bigger story unfolding.
Exactly. And to get that story, you really have to look at the long road Vanda took to get here. This compound, Tradipitant, has been around for a while.
Right. It was originally an Eli Lilly compound, wasn't it?
It was. LY686017. That was its original name. It's a neurokinin-1 or NK1 receptor antagonist. Vanda licensed it from Lilly way back in 2012 for just $1 million up front.
Let's quickly break down the science there. What does blocking an NK1 receptor actually do?
So it basically targets the vomiting reflex at its source. NK1 antagonists block something called substance P, which is a key signaling molecule. It's deeply involved in triggering the nausea and vomiting pathways, both in your gut and in the brainstem in the parts we call the vomiting centers.
So you're essentially hitting the off switch before the signal can even get going.
You got it. You're putting a brake on that whole cascade.
And understanding that is so important because before this motion sickness win, Vanda had a very public, very bruising fight with the FDA over this exact drug.
They really did. This approval is a story of pure persistence. Just a year earlier, in September 2024, the FDA gave them a complete response letter, a CRL, basically a rejection.
And that was for a different condition, gastroparesis.
Right, a chronic condition where the stomach empties too slowly, causing severe nausea. And Vanda's response to that rejection was, let's just say it was aggressive.
How so?
They put out public statements saying the FDA's letter was conclusory, that it just ignored the positive data they already had from 2 placebo-controlled studies. They even pointed out that the decision was over 185 days late. It got so contentious that patients on the drug filed a citizen petition urging the FDA to approve it.
So they basically went to war with the agency, lost that battle for gastroparesis, and then pivoted hard to motion sickness.
Exactly. And for the motion sickness data, they went for something undeniable.
Real-world proof.
Real-world proof. The approval was based on these 2 phase 3 studies, Motion Syros and Motion Seraphos. They were conducted on boats in the real world with real waves.
Can't argue with that. So what were the numbers that finally got the FDA on board?
The numbers were strong. In one of the studies, Motion Syros, the rate of vomiting for people on Nurioss was between about 18 and 19.5%. For the placebo group, it was 44.3%.
A huge difference. And I remember seeing a stat about what happened when things got really bad.
Yeah, that was the kicker. In rough seas, so we're talking waves higher than 1.2 meters, Tradipitant cut the risk of vomiting by 78% compared to placebo. It worked best when people needed it most.
Okay, let's talk about the friction point then. Safety. The old drugs make you drowsy. What about near use?
Well, the profile is generally seen as acceptable for, occasional use, but the side effects are there. The big ones were somnolence, so drowsiness, which affected up to 12% of people, and fatigue, which hit up to 8%.
Wait, 12% drowsiness seems like a really big number. If the bigger play for this drug requires daily use, that seems like a major problem. You have warnings about driving or operating machinery.
That is the critical question. For taking it before a boat trip, it's fine. It's similar to Dramamine. But the second you start talking about the real commercial opportunity, which needs daily use, that 12% somnolence rate becomes a huge headwind. Plus, there are warnings for people with severe kidney or any liver impairment.
Right. So let's pivot to that investor context. The motion sickness market is a nice win, but it's not a blockbuster.
No, it's a respectable niche. You have about 25 to 30% of U.S. adults who get motion sickness. The total market is maybe $670 million in 2025. It's not tiny, but it's not huge either.
And analysts are pegging peak sales for just the motion sickness label at around $100 million a year. That does not explain that stock surge we saw.
Not at all. That $100 million is where this story ends if it's only about cruise ships. The reason the market reacted is because this approval validates the NK1 mechanism, and that validation is the key that could unlock a multi-billion-dollar door.
And that door is the GLP1 market. This is the big pivot. The real question is whether Nurioss can become a support drug for people on Ozempic and Wegovy.
That is the whole ball game.
Yeah.
The GLP1s are the biggest drug class in decades, but they have this one massive Achilles heel.
The gastrointestinal side effects.
Nausea and vomiting. It's a huge problem. In the Wegovy trials, 44% of people got nausea, 24% got vomiting. And the real-world impact of that, the dropout rate for non-diabetic obesity patients is almost 65% within a year.
65%. So people can't stick with the drug long enough for it to work.
Exactly. You don't get the sustained weight loss if you can't adhere to the therapy.
And Vanda has data suggesting their drug can fix this.
The early data is what's getting everyone so excited. They did a study where Tradipitant cut the vomiting rate in half for people taking a high dose of Wegovy. It went from 58.6% on placebo down to 29.3% with Tradipitant.
Having the vomiting rate, that could be the difference between staying on the drug or quitting.
It's a massive difference. The whole value proposition shifts from just being an anti-vomiting pill to an adherence optimizer. If they can prove in a big phase 3 trial that this drug cuts that 65% dropout rate, they suddenly become an essential part of a multi-billion-dollar therapy.
Which brings up the skeptical question. If this is so obvious, why haven't the big guys, Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, already developed their own NK1 blocker?
That is the billion-dollar question, and there are two possibilities. Either they don't believe the mechanism is quite right for long-term use, or Vanda just got there first. Remember, they've been stubbornly pushing this drug for over a decade and have shown they're willing to fight these regulatory battles that big pharma might just walk away from.
So what are the next steps for them to prove this GLP-1 idea?
They're moving ahead. They plan to start a big phase 3 program for this GLP-1 supportive use in the first half of 2026.
Okay, but do they have the money for that? A phase 3 trial is incredibly expensive, and you mentioned they were burning cash.
That is the risk. They have a decent gross margin on their current products, about 72.5%, and around $70 million in cash. But you're right, they have a negative profit margin and free cash flow is negative $31.79 million. They're burning through money.
So that puts a ton of pressure on this trial.
A ton. They need to execute perfectly, and they might need to raise more capital to get it done.
And we should mention, Nurioss isn't the only thing on their plate. There are other events coming up.
Yep, keep an eye on 2 other dates. A re-review for their drug Hetlioz in jet lag is due by January 7th, 2026. And a decision on Mysanti for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia is coming in February 2026. So more catalysts ahead.
Okay, so to sum it up, a niche win in motion sickness that proves a mechanism, a recent failure in a chronic condition, and the entire future of the company riding on solving the biggest problem for the hottest drugs on the planet.
It's an incredible story. They've leveraged a relatively minor win into a shot at the big time.
This is the deep dive. And a reminder, this is not financial advice.
But this setup, this bifurcation in the Vanda story small win versus massive potential, it presents a really interesting, though high-risk investment idea.
Right. The company's value today is basically for that $100 million motion sickness market. It does not reflect the possibility of them becoming a key player in the GLP-1 space. So how would you play that?
The trade idea is basically a bet on that binary outcome of the phase 3 GLP-1 trial. It's an asymmetric volatility play. You're essentially selling the short-term downside risk, maybe by selling some near-term out-of-the-money puts, and you use the money you generate from that to fund a long-term leveraged bet, something like deep-in-the-money calls that expire in, say, 2027 or 2028.
So you're betting that the GLP-1 trial is a massive success.
You're betting that Vanda can fix the adherence problem for Novo Nordisk. If that happens, VNDA isn't a niche travel medicine company anymore. It becomes a GLP-1 bolt-on stock, and the valuation would have to change dramatically.
It's the ultimate David versus Goliath bet. in a way, betting that this small, stubborn company can solve the side effect problem for the giants.
A small amount of risk for a potential multi-million-dollar shift in how we treat obesity. That's the asymmetry.
So what's the final takeaway here after digging through all of this?
I think the key takeaway is that the motion sickness approval, while it looks small, was absolutely essential. It provided the validation for the NK1 mechanism in a tough, real-world setting. That proof is what gives the much larger GLP1 play credibility. Without the boat studies, it's all just speculation.
So the real bottleneck in this whole obesity drug gold rush isn't finding drugs that work, it's finding ways for people to actually stay on them. And Vanda just proved a mechanism that might be the key. And that's the question we'll leave you with. How much is the fix for the GLP-1 adherence problem truly worth?
As always, do your own research, understand the risks, especially with binary biotech events, and manage your portfolio accordingly.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.